What are you doing to keep your dental practice and the people in it safe and secure? We have Sam Rosenberg, whom I met at Vistage a few years ago, who did a security training for us that was phenomenal. And sadly, we are here again with another tragedy in the dental world of a dentist shot and killed in their dental practice. For those of you watching in, you may remember a few years ago, this happened in Texas with two dentists. So too often, this is happening where dentists and their team are facing security threats. And it's kind of wild for me to even say it. I want to welcome Sam to our show. And Sam, just give us a little background on what you do and how you help people be more secure, live with certainty in an uncertain world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Great to be here again. It was a couple of years we talked before. And just a quick background, I've been in the business of protecting people and really teaching them how to protect themselves since 1996. Got out of the Marines way back. I was a Marine officer, kind of landed in the close protection world, a fancy pants way of saying bodyguarding. Ended up protecting a variety of folks, from everyone from Tom Cruise to Warren Buffett, Benjamin Netanyahu when he was the former prime minister, and a variety of people in between. But I ended up having a little bit of a philosophical shift somewhere around 2003, that to me, it's good to have a lifeguard, but ultimately you should know how to swim. So I shifted gears and I really wanted to start to teach people how to protect themselves and their organizations with the same skill sets and mindset that we use to protect public figures. So that's the whole nature and the mission of Live Ready. And nowadays, I've recently distilled this into a book. It's called Live Ready. And it's actually going to be something that we're going to be giving a copy of that away today. So that's the gist of it, Paul. Here we are.
Well, some lucky person in the chat will get a free copy of this book. I'll let my team decide maybe who interacts or asks the best questions. We'll do some of that. Now, kind of walk us through, I'm a dental practice owner and, we have to do so many things in our practice. We have to keep our data secure. We have to have OSHA compliance. We have to have HIPAA compliance. And it's just, to be honest, Sam, it's overwhelming. And now dentists have been asking me and talking on our group, how do we keep our practices secure? What are some things that we should be thinking about? Who do people go to? So I know what dental practices come in all shapes and sizes, from being in office buildings. My dental practice one of them is in a converted home. Another one is in a strip mall. So maybe just kind of talk to our dental professionals about security in their practice for their patients. And I don't know if the right word, Sam, is how to prevent what happened just recently, but how we can mitigate the disastrous consequences. So I'll let you kind of talk about that for a minute or two.
Sure. So let me begin by just saying that the whole idea of, personal protection and really security in general, and we all know that bad things happen and we all hope that they never affect us. But the reality is that these things do happen, and they happen to, businesses and to people of every possible size, shape, walk of life, you name it. And the goal of really being able to manage these things is not to walk around, if you will, or have some sort of certainty that nothing bad will ever happen. What it really is to ensure that you have the capacity to respond, and in so doing, ensure that you have the capacity to minimize the likelihood of an event ever happening. And, really in preparation for our talk today, I wrote down 3 very specific, what I believe to be critical steps that dental practices need to follow. And this is stuff that can be done at any level, and it's scalable. But the very first thing that we want to talk about, and it's really the first step in protecting any person, place, or thing, is to assess. We have to look at what the real threats are, what the real vulnerabilities are. In our business, we have a term that we use called a vulnerability assessment. There's another term that people use quite often also called a threat assessment. But to understand the difference, a vulnerability assessment has to do with places. A threat assessment has to do with people. So in other words, if someone is making threats, we would do a threat assessment to determine if this person who is acting in a threatening manner or making threats, in fact, poses a threat. That's what the threat assessment is for. Before any of that ever happens, what we really want to do is this idea of a vulnerability assessment. And a vulnerability assessment is looking at your physical space, whether it's in a strip mall, a standalone building, whether you're a large practice or a small practice. And what we really want to do is we want to look at technology and leveraging technology to our advantage to minimize the dangers and the threats that may be out there. Easiest things to look at: access control, right? How do you move people through your space? How are you protecting the front desk personnel, if you will, in terms of their interactions? How do you do all that with maintaining an open and a friendly environment, right? I speak a lot about this. I know we have very limited time today, so I'll just mention this. I speak a lot about this in chapter 12 of my book. In other words, I literally go through the process of how we protect any person, place, or thing, starting very first with the idea of assessment.
And I'm going to interject, Sam. I always just say I interject. I don't interrupt. I just interject with brilliant ideas. Ask my wife; she'll agree. If someone wants to get your book, if they listen this far, where would be the best place for them to get your book?
You can buy the book on Amazon. If you just type in Live Ready or Live Ready Sam Rosenberg, it'll pop right up.
Gotcha.
You can also go right to my website, and my recommendation is go to livereadybook.com. And that way you have access to all the links to find the book directly, but also you can join my mailing list and you can just, maintain contact. That way, if you ever have questions or specifics, you can contact me directly, and it's easy to find me.
Thanks. My team will put that in both the Zoom chat and the Facebook Live chat. So we talked about. I'll let you get back to your top three things. I just want to make sure in case people dropped off, they would have an ability to get your book.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, assessment is a fairly easy process. And I want you to understand that you don't have to be a professional to do this. I mean, it is best if you have a larger practice to have an outside professional take a look at your space and really write a report. There's a lot of OSHA compliance dynamics with that come into play. There's a lot of factors that come into play from the standpoint of, God forbid, if you ever have an incident, having had a formal assessment done at some point is a critical liability control step. But let's move on to the second step. And the second step really is to plan. And what we mean by planning is really looking at, what to do, when to do it, how to do it. What do you want your people and your patients as a result? How do you need them to respond in the event of an emergency, no matter what it is? I imagine that a lot of your practices have done some level of business continuity. They say, what happens if the lead dentist gets injured? What happens if someone can't work? There's business continuity planning. This is really emergency response planning. This is crisis planning. And it has been demonstrated time and again, no matter what the environment, no matter what the industry, no matter what the situation, the time to prepare for problems and for challenges is not when you're in the middle of the crisis. That's not the time to figure it out. The time to figure it out is right now, when we're thinking about it and we can get together and whiteboard out. Let's talk about incidences and how do we manage it. Obviously, I still go into this in chapter 12 of my book. So the how to do this is in there. It's not something you need professionals to do. It's great to have professional advice. But I'm telling you right now, this is something you could do with your team. Get a whiteboard out, get a notepad and a paper and say, okay, if someone were to come into this office, God forbid, with a gun, what do we want everyone to do? What is our action step? And map it out. And once you've mapped it out, you understand what your plan is in the event of situations. And I use an active shooter or an armed intruder as an extreme example, because that's kind of what brought us together in this discussion. But understand, this is something you should look at everything from fire, to other kinds of emergencies that could occur in your workspace. Write them all down, create a list and say, how do we want to behave here? Just think about it from the standpoint of what I like to think of as a vertical approach, or what is classically referred to as an all hazards approach. The all hazards approach to planning is to say, how many of these hazards or these incidences can we respond to in a very standardized way? And that standardized way may be, okay, what constitutes an evacuation? What constitutes a shelter in place? What constitutes a lockdown or a lockout? And you create this very simple standard response protocol so that communication of the action is simple and everybody knows what to do in plain English. And then, of course, once you understand what your vulnerabilities are and you've assessed, once you've created your plan, you've methodically written that down, and make sure you write it down, make it a policy, make it an emergency response plan. Then it's appropriate to train. And training is the linchpin. Okay, it doesn't matter what the industry is or what we're talking about. If we don't address the human factor, which is usually where most of the vulnerabilities lie, and where the rubber meets the road in every capacity, and we can only secure environments and we can only create so much security by way of technology or by way of advanced thinking and planning. At the end of the day, it's the people who are in that space, it's the staff and your employees and yourself that need to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And if we keep it simple and we say, okay, if there's a practice owner listening to this who has a couple of staff members, it's a small practice, not a high risk, but they still want to do their diligence in this. This planning does not have to get extreme, and the training does not have to get extreme, but at least training to your plan and saying, okay, gang, if there's a fire, we run a fire drill.
Yeah.
Well, if there's an active shooter, what are we going to do? Should we evacuate? Should we lock down? How are we going to do that? Work through it and rehearse it a little bit. And
I can ask Sam, I just have a question.
Yeah.
From years of watching Grey's Anatomy, hospitals seem to have a lot of like code red, code blue, and they also had the one episode where they had an active bomb. I think that might have been code brown. I'm only asking as a curiosity, like, with fire's not a person, right? So you're not trying to hide that at all. You're saying
Yeah.
you got when you have maybe like this armed intruder or active shooter. Is there, I'm just, are there code words people come up with so that they know people need to get to a certain place? Is that part of the training? I'm just curious about that.
Yes, that's a great question. So there are two facets to that question, two facets to the answer to that question. So in the event of an actual outright emergency, someone walks in brandishing a gun with the intent of shooting people, or there's some level of violence, you don't want to talk in coded phrases. You want to communicate clearly, plain English, and everybody needs to know what the objective is in that moment. Okay. So the prior training and the prior planning of what to do in that event has to happen ahead of time, but the communication in the moment has to be plain English, simple, right to the point. Okay. In the event we have a situation that is potentially escalating, and you have, say, a patient who is very upset, and the front desk person, is addressing that person, there are definitely times and dimensions of that where you want to have signals, if you will, where whoever is addressing that person who is upset can, if the situation merits it, call for help. Okay. And what we typically do is it's not typically verbal in nature. We use nonverbal indicators. So we have certain postures or hand gestures or movements. Because if you think about the practicality of this, Paul, if you're upset and I'm talking to you and you're in my face going, you don't understand, blah, 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 finger pointing and gesticulating, the challenge with that is I can't turn around and say, hey, do me a favor and call the police.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then go back to you and say, so tell me what the real problem is and how I can mitigate it. You can't do that effectively and still negotiate and diffuse the confrontation. So having certain postures or body language that is trained into the staff, everybody knows I'm only going to take a certain position if that means please call 911 in the background, get the cops rolling in the event we need them. Those are the kinds of coded phrases that we use, if you will, and those coded communications. But generally speaking, most situations can be diffused, generally speaking. Most can be identified in advance. And I just want to, if you will, I jumped right into the 3 steps, but I
Sure.
want a moment step back from this, or really step up to a 30,000-foot view. And I'd like to just share with everyone a very sincere belief. There is this notion that violence is random. We have a tendency to label violence random. You hear it in the news, right? There's a random act of violence. No one saw it coming. Someone just snapped. We hear these phrases. what people are saying when they actually use that language is they're suggesting that violence is random and therefore unpredictable. And if it is unpredictable, then what possible responsibility does anyone really have to preventing it or responding to it better, right? It's just going to happen like a lightning strike. But the reality is that violence is actually a process. And it's a process as observable and predictable as the changing seasons if you know what to look for. So, a critical aspect of training is, and why training becomes the linchpin of not only making sure people can respond in an emergency, but that everybody knows how to contribute to prevention, is that it enables everyone to know specifically what to look for so that intervention can happen early and conflicts and crises can be diffused before they actually explode into violence. And those warning indicators are very clear. The problem that we have is, everybody's heard this cute phrase, if you see something, say something. The problem is no one's telling you what the hell to look for, right? So, what I have attempted to do in the book Live Ready, what I do with my training and my consulting is I'm very heavily geared towards teaching people how to recognize the warning signs so they can stop violence before it ever manifests.
So, yeah. And I want to just add, your training that I did a few years ago was great. And, I brought in consultants, Sam, to help my team get along better, work together better. And what I found was that my team would say, I also use this in my personal life. Thanks, Dr. Paul. I learned how to get along better with my team member, but it also helped me get along better with my sister. So we gave them the tools. And what I'm assuming is if a dentist invests in this to keep their team safe and secure, does it also provide these team members, including the dentist, with outside the office security good habits? Is that a good way to put it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the fundamentals are universal, and this behavior, good practices, a way of thinking, this mindset that is enabled ultimately carries over no matter where you are. If you're walking down the street, if you're at church, if you're at the mall with your family, and I want these skill sets to be translatable so that you can explain the same things to your family. And what I want is your family to know better what to do, how to do it in a matter of really minutes or hours, not years of intensive development and training. These skills have to be that simple, and they are.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Did we get to all three? I know you wanted to pull back. Was there more on the
Yeah,
top three
yeah.
list?
The top three really are the assess, the plan, and assess, plan, and train. And in keeping with the idea of the myth of randomness, as I like to call it, I just want everyone to know, you're never helpless in the event of these situations. You always have options as long as you can think and make good decisions. And that's ultimately the most important facet. The key is, though, that the training is what allows that to happen. So I'm a big, big proponent of training, learning how to swim in this environment. And at the end of the day, never forget to trust your own intuition. I mean, that's without any training, without any further information. If you just trust your gut and you teach your people to trust theirs, and if one of your people comes to you and says, I really have a very concerned feeling about patient so and so, or about a coworker, or about a situation, uh, don't dismiss those things. Investigate them and pay attention, because there may be a variety of factors that they're picking up on, and they may be on that intuitive level that's slightly below the conscious level that are worth investigating because there's something there. And that, in the simplest sense, is the most important thing anyone can do, even without formal education.
I love these. You're giving us so many digestible tips. Someone who's an awesome member of our group said, they've learned establishing a special nonverbal signal to call the police would be very helpful. As we, kind of spend a few more minutes together, but so many people have asked for this recording since we're doing it in the middle of the day, and I want to ask some questions that Dennis would be thinking about. So you've given us some actionable tips, some evergreen things to start to think about. Someone here is going to win your book. They can purchase your book also on Amazon. They can go to the link that we have provided here, liveready.co/book. But now, if a dentist is saying, I want more training from someone like you, do you do half-day sessions in dental offices? Do you do these on site? Do they happen online? Is there a combination? I thought what was what I heard as a practice owner is you need an assessment or report that shows you're being responsible with your uh, security assessment. So tell us more about how you could potentially work with a Dental Nachos dental practice that's listening right now.
Yeah, so thank you. We sometimes combine the two things together, or the three elements together, if you will. So from the standpoint of training, we do it in a variety of ways. We do certainly hands-on live workshops for dental practices, for staff, and for teams. And we do that all over the country. So that's just a matter of scheduling. If someone wanted to do in-person training, we can come to you. The second vehicle for that is through the digital means. And we've had such a demand for this type of training that I've actually codified these trainings into a series of e-learning modules. There's no substitute for in-person training, in my opinion, but the closest thing to it is to at least deliver the information, the critical information, digitally. And then the hybrid version of that is very often when we do an in-person training, we provide access to the digital training, because if there's new hires in between live training, if there's people want to refresh their knowledge, then the digital training becomes a supporting infrastructure piece for that. And very often when I said we combine these three elements together of assessing, planning, and training, very often what we'll do is when we're coming into town to do a training, and we can also tie into that a vulnerability assessment on site, which would then be followed up with a report that we provide. And that report would provide very specific guidance as to how to clean up or add to or create, if need be, your emergency response plan. It'll be very specific guidance. Here it is. And that sort of thing is something we do literally day in and day out with organizations large and small. I mean, we worked with companies as small as a handful of employees, and we work with companies as large as 30,000 employees. So, we can scale this to suit.
Really, really, such a needed thing. And as just as we're starting to wrap up, I was thinking as a dentist, sadly, the dentists who lost their lives in these incidents is the one in Texas. I remember there was a patient who was very unhappy with dentures, they said. And for being a dentist, Sam, there's a lot of patients that are unhappy with dentures. So it's poignant to me because we deal with, hey, is someone unhappy with you? If you own a cupcake store, that number is going to be pretty small. And if you own a dental practice, people who are potentially unhappy with you is pretty large. And that creates, I believe, a challenge for us dentists. I mean, I'm just thinking of it as we're talking. I also want to add in, someone has asked a question, do you recommend having a security system in place for a dental practice like we do to secure our homes? Many offices have keys and locks, but no alarm system.
I absolutely recommend an alarm system, and I definitely recommend that, 100% of the time. I think that you should have some type of security system. I would actually go one step further and say, if you're going to go to the trouble of putting a security system in, these are monitored systems. Ask them if they provide panic buttons,
Yeah.
because on every one of those monitors, you have a little panel, you can hit the button that says call the police. And very often, most of those systems nowadays, you can have a little fob that you can leave right at the desk, or that someone can wear in a lanyard. And in an emergency, they hit a little red button, and it's a silent alarm to the police, and the local law enforcement will start rolling. So definitely a good practice.
Well, you've shared so much value with us in just this 20-minute program. We're going to do more with you, Matthew. I appreciate you creating time. When I asked on Monday to do this, it's a very difficult time for the dental profession at large to have to think about these things, deal with these things, mourn the loss of our colleagues. And, I have to, it's every time I say this, this is just something I never thought of when I was growing up in my dad's dental office, would sadly be something we have to think about. But you've taught us why we have to think about it, and why being proactive and, putting the work in ahead of time to mitigate disaster during a crisis is key. So Sam, just as we wrap up, share with us how people could reach out to you if they just hopped on now and said, hey, I want to reach out to Sam for training, learn about his book, ask him some questions, have him speak on my podcast. We have people here. What would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, Paul, before I answer that, can I say one thing about what you just I'll tell you, I present to workplaces and to executive groups, as you know, all over the country. And I can tell you, I've come to realize there's a certain truth when it comes to violence, is that you can do absolutely everything right and still end up being targeted. And sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with you and how much you've tried to preserve people's dignity and do right by people and to make things right. On the domestic side, that sounds like very often, if I can't have you, no one can, right? In many cases, you've done everything right. You tried everything. And nonetheless, the disturbances with the perpetrator, and it's not anything that you necessarily did wrong. And in the workplace, no matter who it is, no matter what the workplace is, any one of us who's a business owner can hear, when you did X, you destroyed my life.
Yeah.
So the idea here is this is simple reality of the world we live in. And to just say what you said, I agree 100%. And as a responsible business owner, as a practitioner and a professional in your industry, I would encourage everyone to investigate this dynamic a little deeper. And if you want to get a hold of me, I mean, if I'm absolutely reachable, best way, go to my website. Easiest way is to go to livereadybook.com. That is a simple URL to remember. You'll find me there, and you can join my mailing list. My email list, I provide a really robust newsletter where I put a variety of articles out, tips, tricks, information. I try to remain very, very, if you will, content centric in terms of making sure the information I put out there is very timely and appropriate and to the point. And if anybody ever wants me on their podcast, just email me. Happy to be there. And if anyone needs me for their practice or wants my organization to help you, just shoot me an email. And my email is real simple. It's samr@livereadysolutions.com. But again, you'll find me if you go to livereadybook.com.
Awesome, Sam. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to go off Facebook Live. Thanks so much for supporting us, and look forward to developing more content to help keep us secure with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for being here.